Hello, I'm Chancellor Holden Thorp. Some of our nation's brightest entrepreneurs have been on campus here at Carolina this week. I had a chance to talk innovation and much more with two of them, Steve Case and Desh Deshpande.
The internet wasn't even commercial until the year these college students started, which was 1992. The first decade we were working on it, it was actually illegal to connect the commercial online service to the internet. It was at the time just limited to educational institutions and government. And I remember spending several years trying to convince PC manufacturers to build modems into PCs, because we said someday people want to actually connect these devices to other devices and people. And in the 80s, people thought that was a little far-fetched. In 1983, I moved to Washington, D.C., a company called GameLine. 6 months later, it was a disaster. One of the venture capitalists looked at this sales statistics and said, "You'd have thought they would have shoplifted more than that." And that was pretty much the end of that company. But I learned a lot there, and thankfully I and two other people I met there ended up starting AOL, not 2 years later in 1985. But like many entrepreneurs, a lot of it was just perseverance and sticking with your idea, even though there's a lot of ups and downs, and often more downs than ups, but eventually kind of you can break through.
Those days, venture guys would not fund you unless you went without a salary at least for a year. And so we had saved up enough money that I quit my job, and a year later we actually got funded. Next company, Cascade Communications, where the idea was that I knew people like Steve would pump enough traffic into the public networks, and the whole Cascade was all about connecting every computer to every other computer and doing these packet switches for the carriers, the Verizons and Sprints and everybody else, and that became a successful company.
So it's not looking for the easy bunt or single. You're kind of swinging for the fences, and Babe Ruth was the home run king. He also was the strikeout king. So it goes with the territory that you're going to take on a lot of risk. But you also have to understand that some of these ideas just sometimes take a while. I was talking about AOL. It really took us a decade before we hit our stride.
The biggest problem that the nonprofits have is actually sustaining themselves. It's very hard. And then so what happens is they have a good year. Suddenly some donor comes and gives a lot of money. They scale it, and then they can't sustain it. And then they have half the money, and then the quality drops, and then you get into this negative spiral which you cannot get out of. So getting them to think about the sustainability up front, I think, works.
What's next? What's the next big thing that you see coming that is exciting, that will change the world?
Well, I think entrepreneurial opportunities are very much like looking for a spouse or looking for a house, They're everywhere, but it's hard to find the one that you really want. And then so for an entrepreneur, that's always a challenge, because you have to jump off the cliff, and then how do you know, right? But I think the general themes of sustainability, energy, I'm doing a company called A123 Systems, which is electrification of the transportation system, weaning ourselves off from oil. A lot of these big themes, life sciences and clean water, clean air, a lot of these problems absolutely have to get solved. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunities. I think life is going to change dramatically over the next 20 years. And every change is going to be led by an entrepreneur.
From my perspective, the last 25 years, particularly focused on the technology side of things, has really been kind of the first internet revolution. Just getting everybody connected, getting with PCs or devices and networks, and now mobility and so forth. So it went from 25 years ago, virtually nobody used it. The people did use it an hour or two a week. That was our early customers. That was the typical usage profile. To now, virtually everybody uses it, and they use it all the time. Maybe too much, but that's a whole other topic. Yeah. But it's now become ubiquitous and mobile. So that's sort of the first internet revolution. Check. I think in terms of what we were trying to create 25 years ago, I think we've largely achieved. Which creates an interesting opportunity for the next 25 years, which I think of as a second internet revolution, which is not so much about internet businesses, but how do you use the internet and its ubiquity and mobility. Part of the interest in Zipcar was that. You could argue it's transportation, it's a car. It's only possible because of the internet. In terms of knowing the cars and having a device, you can walk down the street and find the car and book it and go walk up to the car and open the car up and kind of drive it away. How do you create those kinds of opportunities? And I think it's more interesting not just to focus on the internet as a sector, but how you take that technology and infuse it in every other sector, and that's where I think the next big companies are going to be created.
Thanks again to Steve Case and Desh Deshpande for taking the time to share their insights with the Carolina community. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with these two American innovators. Thanks for watching.